All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of Wrestler Weekly Conversations with Mike Leotis. Happy to have you here today. I'm so excited as we have a very special guest today, the wife of the late, great Bruiser Brody, Barbara Goodish from down in Florida. Barbara, thanks so much for being here.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate giving the time and remembering, especially around Christmas, my late husband.
Well, he's remembered, as we were talking about briefly before we started, how well he's remembered, the legacy and the impact he's left. And, of course, Barbara and the late Larry Matisic wrote a great book. It's called Brody, The Triumph and Tragedy of Wrestling's Rebel. You can pick that up on Amazon. You can pick that up via Kindle. Also on your Nook, if you have that too. That's the way I have the book. But just a great read. You'll get the wrestling perspective. You'll get the personal perspective. A must read if you're a professional wrestling fan. So Barbara, take us back. How did you and Frank meet?
Well, I'm going to just say one last thing.
Yeah.
If anybody wants a copy of the book signed, send me a private message through Facebook or Twitter, and I would be happy to send a signed copy to them.
Excellent. Very well. So if you want a signed copy of the book, Brody, you can private message Barbara either on Facebook or Twitter. Very cool. I'm sure a lot of fans will be looking to take you up on that.
And to get back to your question is, no, I happened to be in Australia, and he just happened, there was a lot of the wrestlers were working in Australia, and I just happened to be working in a hotel, and I was working down at the front desk the day that he checked in, just from pure luck, and that's how I met him. And what it was, we had a lot of the wrestlers stay at the hotel that I was working at. And you have to remember, these were the days before any of this technology and communication. So when they were over in a strange country, most of communication was from letters. So I would come down, get the letters, give them to all the gentlemen. They would show me pictures of their wives and their children. And it was a very lonely time back then without the communication that we have today. And as I said, he was in Australia for about 9 months he was working over there. This was way back in the 70s, you have to remember. It was 77, if I remember. Just yesterday, just a few years ago. Giving my age away.
That's all right. So when you met, obviously you see these big hulking wrestlers. Were you familiar with wrestling at that time, or?
No, didn't know anything about it at all. And I've always been the sort of person that I just see inside people, because you can't, as we know, you can't judge a book by its cover. Yes. And they just became like big brothers to me. They were just like big brothers, and I had no clue on wrestling back in those days. And it just so happened that, like I said, they were lonely, and they loved to talk about their families and things because they missed them. They were in such a different country at that stage. And I always remember showing me little photographs of their children and just being lonely, being away from home. And it was about 3 months into it, and we had so many. Killer Carl Club, Andre the Giant, met Andre. He was one of the ones I know we couldn't believe the size of him, and we used to marvel about what he ate for breakfast and how he could drink. And getting into the little cars over there, because Australia, they didn't have big cars, not like in America back in the old days. So it was like Andre wore the car. They had a hard time putting them into the car because they were small, but they managed, and they would go. And so this one night, I had to fill in the person that was meant to be on the 3 to 11 shift just didn't turn up. So being who I am, they said, "Do you mind just filling in?" I said, "Sure, I'll fill in. I've got nothing else to do." And they all came back about, just as I was getting off. So a Texas gentleman actually owned a hotel, and he had a piano bar that was, up the street called the Bourbon and Beat. And so they came in and said, "Hey, why don't you come up the street and have a, drink with us. We're just finishing work. You're finishing work. Let's go. There was about 12 of them. I'm talking about from midgets to giants to, it was quite an assortment of sizes, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
Being that. So we all went up there. Frank was there. As the night progressed, one by one, everybody started to leave. And it finished. I thought, I didn't really think anything of it. And then all of a sudden, there was just three of us. It was me and Frank and Killer Carl Kropp, who's also, passed on too. And then in the finish, Carl gets up and says, I'll be back. And that just left the two of us. And as I found out later, he worked me because he had arranged for everybody. He wanted to get me by myself, so he had arranged. He knew I wouldn't just probably go up with him alone, so that's why he'd arranged with all the boys. Let's just, we'll get her up there, and then guys just disappear one by one.
So a nice move by Frank to get you alone. And what stood out about him to you? What were some of the endearing qualities that you really liked about him?
Very quiet, very intelligent, very easy to get along with. Nothing like, I didn't know the persona in the ring either at that time. Just, the long hair and the everything, but not how he was in the ring. I just only saw him as Frank Goodish. I never saw him as Bruiser Brody.
Okay.
So it was always just Frank Goodish, the very polite gentleman that was talk to me in the hotel and everything like that. So that's the only thing I saw was this very polite gentleman, if you can believe that. Seeing everybody knows him as this wild man in the ring.
So when were you first exposed to Bruiser Brody, and what was your thought when you saw this quiet gentleman go out there with the, like you had mentioned, with the long hair and this wild man in the ring?
I have to think, that's a good question. I was never asked that, but it was like, I don't think, because I hardly ever saw him work. Of course, I started he would bring back, especially when he was working in Japan, he would bring back tapes. But really, I was just thinking that I very rarely ever went to a wrestling match.
Wow.
So really, I probably saw him when he had tapes of himself before I actually saw him live.
Wow, okay. So
because he was traveling so much and we ended up in San Antonio, Texas, and I was just trying to think. I think it was the match I remember was he had a sister outside of St. Louis in those days, and he had a match with Ric Flair. I think everybody still talks about this match. It was the one he went 1 hour, and the Japanese people had come over to tape it as well. So because of the fact that her sister was there, he said, I'd like you to see this match, because I think he knew it was going to be a really good match. A little different than the wild match he did. I mean, This was actually a wrestling match, because I know people still remark on that one. They still remember, because he went toe-to-toe with Rick, and I think they went for 1 hour or something.
Yeah, and I believe, if I remember correctly, was the highest grossing match in history at that point, for St. Louis. So that was a huge, huge match.
Right, I remember. It was kind of, what was it? Was it the I can't remember. Checkadome? What are the ones, whatever it was down there in St. Louis? I'm not sure exactly. Not sure which building. It was in quite a big building. And that, I think, was one of the first matches that I can remember that I saw. And then sometimes, like when Jeff got a little older and he was working for Fritz, and he'd sometimes have a match maybe an hour, couple of hours away from the home. So once in a while, if he didn't have anyone to ride with, he took me and Jeff with him. But the thing was, we didn't really go to the match. Like if he was like in Corpus Christi, me and Jeff would go walk around there, and we'd meet him after the match and that. So really, as you say, when you say that, my most thing is seeing tapes of him on the TV without actually seeing him live. And sometimes, like some of these little tiny buildings in Texas, they would have to change out on the street. They didn't even have a dressing room, some of the small buildings.
Wow, and I think a lot of fans really remember him from Texas wrestling. I remember one of my fondest memories of Frank is when he came in to be Kerry Von Erich's tag team partner against the Freebirds, and that was one of my first exposures to Bruiser Brody, and I was hooked like that. Just seeing him come in and battle the Birds. But you take a look at the book, and one of the things I really enjoyed about your book was there's two things that stood out. The one thing was when you talked about how you would see that change happen when he would go in the airport from Frank to Bruiser.
Right. I mean, we'd drop them. Of course, these were the days when you could drop them off and wait right at the, right on the, outside the door. Yeah. Not like it is today. You can't do that before the security. But I'd pull up to the front door and would sit there and watch him, and he'd be very quiet and, you know what I mean? He's his dad and husband. He'd walk through the doors, and you could see the change. He would take his head down. I mean, you'd actually see the change in the same way when he came back through the doors. He left Bruiser Brody behind and became dad and husband. And probably maybe that's why he became so successful, because he could distinguish between the two characters. He never did fully become Bruiser Brody. Like sometimes people become the character they create. And I think that's why, a lot of people remember him, because I've had people come up to me, young, people that remember seeing him in an airport when they were just a little kid, and they would tell me that they were so scared of him because he looked so big and mean and like this big monster that they would kind of, he must have seen that they were a little scared, and he would come over and talk to them and bend down and talk, and they always said that was one of the things that they got out of it, was you can't judge a book by its cover, because they realized this monster walking through the airport, but then when he came and talked to them, he was this quiet gentleman.
Well, and that's how, again, I think the fans are really going to love seeing that, the difference between Bruiser Brody and Frank Goodish. And I think the other thing that I was going to mention that really stood out about the book was the connection with Jeff and how much he loved being a dad. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Oh, yes. I think that was one of his greatest moments, and the sad part is that he was only in his life for such a short time. And I think that's, the sad... No, they would play games. It was when He-Man, there was action figures called He-Man and Skeletor. And Jeff was He-Man and Dad was Skeletor. And they'd get down on the floor and play with this Castle Grayskull, and they'd play these games between the two. And it was like, I think people would not believe that from what he appears in the ring, and here he is on the floor with his son playing this He-Man and Skeletor game.
Well, and like I said, I mean, there's some great photos in the book as well that you'll see from some of the Goodish family Christmases and things. And again, it really gave perspective on this wonderful person that he really was. And I think that's something that, it's one thing to root for somebody in the ring, but when you can see a genuine person and get to know who they are, and even that little bit that lets us in as the fan, you got to witness that on a daily basis, and that must have been really something.
Yes, it was. I wish I could have witnessed it more, because with his traveling, especially when he started in Japan, I mean, you count up all the days, and we were probably lucky enough to see him 3 months out of a year. That's how much he traveled. And, you just make the best of whatever situation you happen to be in, and it worked.
Yeah. Well, and for the following that he has here in the States, and I'm glad you mentioned Japan. I mean, he was godlike in Japan. And still today, even there in that country, still remembered so fondly.
I know, I was so glad, the Japanese company, after it happened, Baba, took me over there. They had a big memorial show for him, and I think, because he always used to tell me, you will never know what it's like in Japan. He said, I can't explain it, it's just so different, than the United States. And I was lucky to experience what he went through and what the fans thought of him, because it was an experience. And I'm glad Jeff, I don't know how much he remembers because he was 7 at the time, but it was I really appreciative of the Japanese people and the respect that they gave. And it was, even though it was a sad time, it was still an incredible experience, and that I got to see exactly how they thought about him in Japan that I never would have experienced otherwise.
Yeah, he's just so beloved, and again, by so many. And I know you and I had mentioned before we got on here, just even meeting people of all ages who had only maybe seen videos of him now, who remember him and see, wow, how great was Bruiser Brody,
Oh, I know. That's why I always have to tell this story about when I was at the Cauliflower Alley Club, and this young gentleman came up to me and told me all about my late husband and read the book. And then when I asked him how old he was only 29 years old. And he's a young wrestler, and I thought, boy, what a legacy this gentleman has left. Here's somebody that was not even born when he left us, and here he is telling me all these things about him at such a young age.
Yeah, I think it speaks volumes again, and we've mentioned it several times, but I think it's important to remember, because when somebody leaves an impact like that and has not only people who know things about him, but people who modeled their styles after what Frank did in the ring, people whose whole careers are based off of, hey, I was a Bruiser Brody fan, I want to be like him.
And this is like you said about, this is the legacy he left too, because one of the things that he always wanted, because he'd always say this to me, he said, all I want to do is for those fans to leave that building after spending their hard-earned money and not knowing and saying, wow, is it real?
Yeah. And, you take a look, so he had a long career, a very distinguished career. Now, obviously, the travels to Puerto Rico. Was Frank still looking to wrestle at that time? Was he looking to wind down, or was he looking to continue? Did he have plans to continue, or?
No, he was already in the process of figuring out, okay, I'm, in my 40s, because he was 42 when he passed, it's about time. I better start looking for something beyond wrestling, because I don't know how long, the body can hold up, and, it's a hard physical, as you know, it's a hard physical job, especially after you play football to start with, and then you go into wrestling, your body is beat up.
Yeah.
So most of them now have had, replacement knees and hips and shoulders and, So he had started up a Brody Athletic Management, BAM, B-A-M, Brody Athletic Management Company, that he was going to go in. He was working with a professor from the Texas University there in San Antonio. And what they were going to do, he had already bought a wrestling ring. He was going to go around, get into the schools and go round, set the ring up, and do a skit on the dangers of drugs.
Wow.
This was Dare was really big back in those days. And he thought to himself that maybe he would get through to some of these children, because a lot of times, and I know I didn't, I'm sure my son didn't either, with me, they don't listen to us as a parent or an authoritative figure. They tune us out.
Yeah.
When we're trying to tell them, the dangers of life. They kind of don't listen to us a lot of times. So this way he figured out, because of the way he looked, he would command their attention, and I'm sure they would have. He actually, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just the way he looked and the way that he would do it, so that they could understand that, hey, go on, make something of yourself. Be careful, because there's dangers everywhere in life, especially as a young man or woman. And he had bought some land that he was going to make a boys' camp so that, like in the school holidays, take some of these disadvantaged young men and take them out to his land, and you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Teach them, to give them something that they might not be able to get. And this is, I think, one of the saddest things, that I think he could have helped so many people, because this was what he was wanting to do, was to, kind of mentor some of these youth that, there's a lot out there that just don't get a chance, and all it takes is maybe that one special person or a few special person that can really change somebody's life around.
Absolutely, and that's a wonderful sentiment, because it does a lot of times take that one mentor, that one person who believes in you and says, hey, I see something in you. And again, with who he was, especially at the time, I think that would have been highly successful, because of that's using his spotlight, what he's given to the world, for such good things. And it is sad that it didn't come to fruition. But again, I believe things work out for the good, and taking a look at just even knowing that, it just, again, I think it's why Bruiser Brody, Frank Goodish, is remembered so fondly, because of not just the character, but because of the man that he was. And that always shines through. The cream really does always rise to the top.
Exactly. So yes, that was his plan after wrestling.
So as you get closer to this, did Frank see any trouble brewing in Puerto Rico? Was this just kind of out of left field, or did he kind of sense that there was some problems down there?
No, because I had talked to him that afternoon. Everything was fine. We had, I think it was a Saturday, and we had planned to talk again on Monday. So no, there was absolutely no problem that he found. He was pretty good. He could usually feel problems way before they came. So no. So now, how do you find out when this happens? Do you get a phone call, or? Yeah, I'm just going to go into this just a little bit, and that. No, we had an agreement that when the phone rings late at night and it's a woman, because that was anything. We didn't have an answering machine back in those days, and. When somebody's in the public eye, there's always a few little trouble spots, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And I had women calling me to cause trouble, of course. That's just part of the business, and regardless of anything, any entertainment business, whether it's athletes or rock stars or anything, you've always got a certain fraction that,
Yeah.
So we always had an agreement that we had talked that afternoon, so I knew we'd arranged to talk Monday. So, but the phone kept ringing. I didn't answer the phone. The phone kept ringing and ringing and ringing. In fact, it got to the point where I was getting a little peeved off, because I was trying to get to sleep that night. I finally answered the phone. Of course, there was a woman on the phone, but I listened. She said, look, just listen to me. And she'd mentioned there had been an accident. That's all I knew. There'd been an accident, and perhaps, you better come down to Puerto Rico. I thought, oh, yeah, right. Someone's really trying to cause trouble. Yeah, I get on a plane, fly down, or I'm really going to be in trouble. So with me, I thought, well, I'm going to check it out. Just don't, you know what I mean? Didn't want to totally ignore it. So I called his hotel, and they put me through to Dutch Mantel's room, who told me, yes, there had been a little slight, I didn't know what it was, but there had been an accident, and, maybe you should come down. So when the woman called back, it was Carlos's wife, Nancy. She was a Canadian girl, thank goodness, which I could understand.
Yeah.
So, just a short story. Yeah, that's how I found out, and that's how I flew down that day. And then, of course, I found out I was too late, and then the rest is history, as you know.
Well, and again, 30 years later, here we are, and again, we're still talking about the great legacy of Bruiser Brody. And while 42 is too young for anybody to leave this earth, I think, and you had mentioned earlier how cathartic it was to write the book, to kind of get those things out. Tell us about how Larry approached you to do the book, and why it was so helpful to do the book.
well, because several people had asked me to do a book, but I didn't know them, and I didn't know. In fact, there is a couple of books, especially one book out, which I've half read, and a lot of it is not truthful. You know, it's just people talking. It's not truthful. Whereas with Larry, when Larry approached me, he said, you know, we should get the truth out there. And I went, yes, I know, because, I mean, Larry was one of the people that Frank really trusted, so I knew that no matter what, he would do a good job. And he said, no, you know, why don't you do, you know, part of it? I said, no, I'm no writer, I can't do it. He said, no, just speak from the heart. You know, when you tell the truth, it's easy. You just write. You know, you're not trying to make up anything like a lot of these stories are made up. He said, I'll be the truthful, I'll do the wrestling part and the business part, and you just do the personal. And I said, well, if anybody can do it, and if anybody can leave the truth out there, it's Larry. So that is how we ended up writing the book. And as I said, it's very sad that Larry passed away last month it was, and as I said, but yeah, he was just a wonderful, and we also in St. Louis with a Herb Simmons, we had a Bruiser Brody. He had a Bruiser Brody annual match every year. I'd go down to St. Louis. I got to see Larry at least every year, which I'm so grateful about.
Oh, that's wonderful.
You know, just a little tiny, Herb just runs this little tiny wrestling event once a month outside St. Louis. It's not a big venue or anything, but it's like being in the it's like being how it used to be in the old days.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also, do you know, I don't know if you know this, if you know that there's a Bruiser Brody Cup coming up on January the 21st.
Oh, very nice. I was not aware of that. That's wonderful.
Yeah. This is it's done as I think it's Gimmick Tree Entertainment, Charlie Armstrong Hartman. He's doing it at the Lithuania Music Hall in Philadelphia.
Wow.
On January the 21st, and he's bringing me in to present the cup. And he also has J.J. Dillon and Abdullah the Butcher and Stan Hansen and Bobby Fulton are going to be there. So
Wonderful.
It should be quite. Yeah, it should be quiet because Stan has been my friend from the time that it happened. You know, we talk on a constant basis, and I love his family, and I always like some of these events because I get to visit with Stan, too.
Well, and again, you had talked a lot about meeting people, and I'm sure it must mean so much to you to know how much people really remember him and love him. And, you know, again, you know, obviously to have the strength that you and your son have had over the years to go through something, but to see the wonderful things that have come, you know, here in later years that he can be remembered and talked about so fondly, I'm sure it must be really nice.
You know, it is. Even some of the great ones, like JJ, I see him every year, too. So I'm looking forward to seeing all these people. And Abdullah. I mean, Abdullah has some great stories, too, because some of those matches were incredible. Him and Frank had some incredible matches together. Yeah, he's a character. So I'm looking forward to seeing, because these were friends of Frank's, too. So it's really good. You know, it's like old times, catching up on old times. So I'm looking forward to, because they're quite a characters. It's the old wrestling that's, you know, dying off hard with all the new wrestling and everything.
Yeah. Well, folks, just so excited to have had Barbara Goodish today. Some great stories about her husband, Bruiser Brody. You got to see a little bit more of the personal side of him, too. But pick it up, Brody, The Triumph and Tragedy of Wrestling's Rebel. If you want that signed, all you have to do is private message Barbara either on Facebook or Twitter, and she'll sign you a copy of that. But I highly recommend you pick it up. So keep in mind, we got some great episodes coming up in the new year. We have Bob Roop, we have Ricky Morton, Kevin Von Erich. So hopefully you guys will join us then. Thank you for another episode, and we'll talk to you soon.